Daddy, that lady looks like Mommy. Ethan Brooks barely registered his daughter's voice at first. He was too focused on cutting her waffle into manageable bites, the silver fork scraping lightly against the plate. Sunday mornings were their tradition. Breakfast at Annie's diner, just the two of them, a small pocket of routine in a life that had been anything but predictable. Lily, don't point at people, that's rude, he murmured automatically, eyes still on the syrup-drenched waffle. But then he looked up, and everything stopped. 10 feet away, walking past their table with a notepad in hand, was a woman who made his blood run cold. Her dark curls were pulled back loosely, a few strands falling naturally to frame her face. She smiled at a nearby customer, and with that smile the air left Ethan's lungs. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was Vanessa, his late wife. He blinked once hard, then again. But she was still there, moving, breathing, laughing at something a customer said. He felt the fork slip from his hand and heard it clatter against the table, but the sound seemed distant, like it was happening underwater. His fingers had gone numb. For a moment it felt like the room shrank, like he was standing still while the rest of the world kept spinning. He had seen that smile in wedding photos. He had memorized every detail of that face, the freckle near her right eyebrow, the soft line of her jaw, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. He had buried that face. He had kissed her cold forehead in a sterile funeral home. He had scattered her ashes into Lake Travis on a quiet autumn morning, with Lily clinging to his side, asking where Mommy had gone. And now she was standing 10 feet away. Daddy, Lily's voice broke through. Are you crying? He didn't answer. He hadn't noticed the tears sliding down his cheek until then. The woman, Elena, her name tag read, walked toward their table. She didn't look twice. No hesitation, no flicker of recognition. Just the easy smile of someone doing her job. Can I get you anything else, she asked. The voice. That voice. It was like someone had punched him in the chest. Vanessa, he whispered before he could stop himself. She froze for the briefest moment, eyebrows pulling together. I'm sorry, she said. You look just like... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The woman smiled politely, a bit tighter now. My name's Elena. I've been told I have one of those familiar faces. Lily, unaware of the emotional storm brewing beside her, piped up with the honesty only a 5-year-old can deliver. You look just like my mommy. I have pictures at home. Elena glanced at her, then at Ethan. She didn't reply, just nodded awkwardly. I'll bring some more juice, she said, and walked quickly away. Ethan stared at her retreating figure, his mind spiraling. It didn't make sense. Vanessa was gone. Gone. Dr. Keller had told him the body was unrecognizable after the crash, that a closed casket was necessary, that cremation was the best option. He had followed all the instructions, signed all the forms, grieved, mourned, moved on, at least outwardly. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and opened his favorite photo of Vanessa, the one taken the day Lily was born. It was all there, every detail, the same cheekbones, the exact curve of her smile, the faint birthmark that not even Vanessa herself remembered having until he pointed it out years ago. It wasn't just a look-alike. Something was wrong, deeply, terrifyingly wrong. Lily leaned over and tugged his sleeve. Why is Mommy pretending she doesn't know us? He turned to her, eyes full of things he couldn't say. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out, because the truth was he didn't know. He reached for his wallet, pulled out a $20 bill, and placed it on the table. Come on, sweetheart, he said softly. Let's go. But Daddy, not now, Lily. He took her hand and walked out, his head down, his thoughts a thunderstorm. But as they stepped through the door, he couldn't help glancing back one more time. Elena was at the counter laughing with a coworker, like she had no idea she had just opened a wound Ethan thought had closed forever. As he buckled Lily into her car seat, a new feeling gripped him, something he hadn't felt in 2 long years. Doubt, and maybe hope. He drove in silence, hands trembling on the wheel. Lily had fallen asleep in the back seat, her head resting against the window, the sunlight catching in her curls. Ethan glanced at her through the rearview mirror, peaceful, unaware. Just hours ago, it had been another ordinary Sunday. Now the ground beneath everything he thought was true had started to crack. She had her mother's hands. He always thought that, even when she was a baby. The soft curve of her knuckles, the way she clasped her little fingers in sleep, it was pure Vanessa. And now she was dreaming in the back seat after seeing a woman who shouldn't exist. Back home, Ethan tucked Lily into her bed, kissed her forehead, and closed the door behind him. His body was moving through the motions of routine, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. The image of the waitress of Elena was burned into his vision, playing on a loop. He poured himself a glass of water, but left it untouched on the counter. Instead, he went to the closet in the hallway. From the top shelf, he pulled down an old worn shoebox. It was dusty and untouched for months. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Vanessa smiling at their wedding, holding Lily wrapped in a pale blue blanket, teaching their daughter to bake cookies, laughing in front of the Christmas tree, and one photo in particular, his favorite. Vanessa standing at the edge of Lake Travis, the wind pulling at her hair, that same birthmark near her eyebrow, just barely visible in the sunlight. He studied that photo for a long time. Then he pulled out his phone and zoomed in on the quick snapshot he had managed to take of Elena while she walked away from their table. Even from the side, the resemblance was chilling, not similar, identical. And yet, this woman didn't know him, didn't know Lily. No flicker of recognition. Could it really be some one-in-a-million coincidence? The doubt gnawed at him, but so did something else, memories he had buried. The way Dr. Keller had pushed for immediate cremation, how the nurse at the hospital had gently but firmly insisted he not view the full body, just the face. "It's better this way," she had said. "Trust me, Mr. Brooks." Even the accident itself had been strange. Vanessa had never taken that road. And there were no witnesses, no photos of the crash, just a report, just paperwork. And now a woman with her face, her voice, her smile. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. He sat at his desk surrounded by photographs and medical files, staring at them as if they might rearrange themselves into answers. Something didn't add up. And for the first time since that dreadful night 2 years ago, he wasn't pushing the feeling away. He was letting it speak. At 2:03 a.m., he typed a name into his contacts. Theo Grant. Theo had been a private investigator once before a messy divorce, and a bad gambling habit burned his credibility. But Ethan had done his taxes pro bono when no one else would. Theo owed him, and more importantly, Theo didn't ask unnecessary questions. He hit send. "I need your help. Something's not right. I'll explain everything tomorrow." The next morning, Lily padded into the kitchen in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, are we going back to the waffle place?" Ethan crouched down and looked her in the eye. "Maybe, but not today." She tilted her head. Was that lady not Mommy? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I don't know, sweetheart," because that was the truth. He didn't know. Not anymore. Later that day, he drove back to Annie's diner, alone. He parked across the street and watched from the car, sunglasses shielding his eyes. Elena arrived at 10:02 a.m., walked through the back entrance wearing the same black sneakers Vanessa used to wear when she worked in the kitchen during college. She looked happy, normal, real, which made it even harder to breathe. She served tables, joked with the cook, poured coffee like she'd been doing it for years. No signs of trouble, no hidden cameras, no nervous glances. But Ethan noticed something. There was a man in a dark sedan parked at the corner. He wasn't eating, wasn't reading, just watching. Ethan took a photo of the license plate. Something was very wrong, and he was done pretending it wasn't. 3 days passed. Ethan returned to Annie's diner each morning, never entering, always watching from across the street. Elena's routine never changed, arriving just after 10, hair pulled back, the same easy smile, the same fluid movements. She was friendly, focused, consistent. But the more Ethan observed, the more certain he became she wasn't just some waitress. She was trained to seem ordinary, and the black sedan kept showing up. Different parking spots, different times, but always nearby. The same man inside, clean-cut dark suit, mirrored sunglasses. Never approached the diner, never left the car, but always watching. He was subtle about it, professional. Ethan recognized the type. Not law enforcement, something else, something quieter. He'd seen that stillness before, working cases in financial forensics, catching white-collar criminals who hid behind layers of fake ledgers and offshore accounts. This was the same flavor of secrecy, just a different kind of fraud. On the fourth morning, Theo pulled up beside him in a battered pickup and climbed into the passenger seat without a word. He handed Ethan a slim manila folder. I ran the plate, Theo said, rubbing his jaw like he hadn't slept. The car's registered to something called the Keller Neuro Institute. Ring a bell, Ethan's breath hitched. Dr. Adrian Keller, he said quietly. He's the one who pronounced Vanessa dead. He signed the cremation order, treated her for some autoimmune thing months before the crash. Theo raised an eyebrow. You're telling me the same guy who told you to burn your wife's body is now running a clinic that's having her watched? Ethan said nothing, but his silence answered for him. There's more, Theo continued. Elena, she didn't exist before 2 years ago. No social, no tax records, no credit history. She's on a lease, sure, but it's underwritten by a foundation called NeuroNova, same group that bankrolls Keller's research facility. And she's filling prescriptions for a drug cocktail that isn't FDA approved. Stuff so experimental I couldn't even ID 2 of the compounds. Ethan swallowed hard. So, what are we saying here? That they faked her death, wiped her memory, and now what? Have her serving waffles. Theo gave him a long look. I don't think it's about waffles. Back at home that night, Ethan pulled out a worn storage bin from the back of his closet, old medical documents, insurance forms, copies of Vanessa's treatment history. He hadn't looked at them in over a year. As he flipped through the pages, one form made him stop. A consent form authorizing experimental neurological treatment in the event of a mental health crisis. It bore Vanessa's signature. But the handwriting, it wasn't right, hesitant, off. Like someone trying to copy her cursive but unfamiliar with the way her loops curled or how she dotted her I's. Then, as if summoned by fate, Lily walked into the room holding an old photo album. Daddy, I found something in Mommy's book, she said, holding up a business card. Ethan took it. The logo was unmistakable, NeuroNova Foundation. On the back, a phone number written in pen. Not Vanessa's writing. It was blocky, male. His pulse picked up. That card hadn't been in the album before. Someone had put it there recently. Everything in him screamed this wasn't a coincidence. It was a map, a warning, or both. He glanced at the clock. 9:17 p.m. Without thinking, he grabbed his phone coat and keys. He needed to confront Keller. He needed answers. But when he arrived at the clinic the next morning under a false name, the receptionist looked up with a rehearsed smile and said, I'm sorry, Dr. Keller has canceled all appointments this week. He's traveling out of state. Ethan didn't reply. He didn't need to, because just behind the woman on the wall was a photo. Dr. Keller receiving an award. Standing right next to him, Bradley Cole, the owner of Annie's Diner. Ethan's world tilted, and the quiet voice that had been whispering in the back of his mind for days, it turned into a roar. Ethan stepped out of the clinic and into the Texas sun, but the warmth didn't touch him. His skin prickled cold. His mind was no longer a blur of questions. It was a storm, sharp and focused. Keller, Cole, Vanessa. All pieces of something vast and deliberate. Whatever had happened to her wasn't a tragic accident. It had been engineered. He climbed into his car and sat there for a moment, staring through the windshield as if it could somehow show him the full picture. But the picture wasn't complete yet. He needed more. He texted Theo. Cole and Keller are connected. Found proof. Call me. Within an hour, they were back at Theo's place, cluttered, disorganized, but wired like a war room. Monitors glowed with surveillance footage, license plate databases, and medical record archives. Theo dropped a file on the table. I did some digging, he said. NeuroNova is a front. It's a shell nonprofit owned by something called the New Mind Foundation. They fund a lot of Keller's research, and guess what? They lease the building Elena goes to after her shifts. Ethan leaned forward. She goes there. Theo nodded. I followed her yesterday. After work, she takes the 520 bus, gets off near East 5th, then walks 3 blocks to a nondescript building. No signage, just a glass door and a security system. She has a key card. Ethan's heart pounded. You're sure? Theo brought up a grainy photo on his screen. It was Elena still in her uniform walking into the building, greeted by a nurse in scrubs. The timestamp was from less than 24 hours ago. She's not just being watched, Theo said. She's a participant, willing or not. Ethan felt sick. And you said the drugs, experimental neurocognitive suppressants. One's a sedative. The other rewires memory retention, been tested in rodents, maybe primates, but nothing on humans legally. She's on a regular dose schedule, probably to keep her docile compliant. Ethan stood and began pacing, hands clenched. They erased her. They took her identity, rewrote it, and stuck her in a fake life. And I signed the papers. I cremated an empty box. Theo watched him silently for a beat, then said, "We need proof." That night, Ethan followed Elena himself. He stayed far back, used the car's reflection in windows to avoid being seen. She exited the diner right on schedule, walked to the same bus stop, boarded, and got off near East 5th, exactly as Theo had said. Ethan parked 2 blocks away and tailed her on foot. The building was quiet, gray, glass panels that reflected just enough to obscure the inside. She scanned a key card and entered without hesitation. Ethan crept closer, peering through a narrow gap in the blinds. Inside was a waiting room, clean, minimal, modern. A nurse handed Elena a clipboard. She smiled, thanked her, then sat in one of the armchairs like she'd done it 100 times before. She didn't look scared or confused. She looked comfortable, and that terrified him more than anything, because whatever they'd done to her, it had worked. He stepped back into the shadows, heart racing. This wasn't grief-fueled delusion. It wasn't wishful thinking. It was real. Vanessa, his wife Lily's mother, was alive, but she didn't know who she was, and someone had made damn sure she'd never find out. As he walked briskly back to his car, Ethan knew one thing with certainty: he couldn't go to the police, not yet. This was bigger than jurisdiction, bigger than protocol. So he opened the encrypted folder on his phone, the one he'd created when the suspicions first began, and started compiling everything: the surveillance photos, the clinic address, the falsified medical consent form, the business card Lily found. The pieces were forming a puzzle that, once complete, wouldn't just expose a crime. It would dismantle an entire machine. And Ethan, he wasn't afraid anymore. He was ready to burn the whole thing down. Thursday night came like a held breath. Ethan sat in the SUV across from the Neuronova building, fingers drumming lightly on his knee. In the back seat, Theo double-checked the equipment: hidden cameras, audio recorders, a direct live stream link to a private server routed through a journalist's laptop. Caleb sat beside Ethan, silent. This was his sister inside. He hadn't seen her in 2 years, hadn't truly believed Ethan until he saw the photo. Now his jaw was tight and his fist clenched in his lap. At 7:43 p.m., the familiar black sedan pulled into the parking lot. Dr. Adrian Keller stepped out, adjusting his tie, eyes flicking toward the street as if sensing something. He didn't see the SUV, didn't look twice. He walked through the security door with a confident swipe of his access card. Ethan exhaled. "That's our window." 10 minutes later, they moved. The stolen key card from the sympathetic nurse worked flawlessly. The building was quiet, sterile. Down the hall, soft fluorescent lights glowed beneath a single door. As they approached, Ethan could hear voices. He motioned to Theo, who started the live recording. Inside the room, Keller's voice was calm, precise. "Subject 7 is stable. Identity lock has held for over 700 days. No recall events. Conditioning is complete." Ethan peeked through the narrow window. Vanessa Elena was reclined in a chair, wires attached to her temples. Her face, blank, eyes open but distant. Her posture was relaxed, her breathing even. She looked like she was asleep with her eyes open. "What about side effects?" asked another voice, deeper, unfamiliar. Ethan's breath caught. The man standing beside Keller was Bradley Cole. "Minimal," Keller replied. "Confusion during rest cycles. But overall compliance is strong. She takes the medication willingly. Believes it's for migraines." Cole nodded, then added, "And the husband," Keller waved a hand. "He thinks he saw a ghost. Grief does that. No one believes a widower who sees his dead wife in a diner. Classic case. That was it." Ethan pushed the door open with a hard shove. The room fell silent. Keller turned, stunned. Theo stepped in behind Ethan, holding up the live feed on a tablet. "You're live. This conversation is being recorded and broadcast to the district attorney's office and half the local press." Keller paled. "You don't understand. I understand. You stole my wife." Ethan growled, stepping closer. "You lied. You drugged her. You erased her life." Vanessa stirred slightly in the chair but didn't speak. Her eyes fluttered, trying to focus. "You need to leave," Keller hissed. You're interfering with groundbreaking medical work. Caleb stepped forward, voice trembling. You're experimenting on people. My sister. Cole reached for something, an alarm switch maybe, but Theo was faster. He yanked the power cord from the wall. Vanessa flinched. Ethan knelt beside her, gently placing a photo into her hand. The one from Lake Travis. It's me, he whispered. Ethan, your husband. This is our daughter Lily. She misses you. Her eyes didn't register anything. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out Fred, the old worn stuffed bear Lily had begged him to bring. He placed it gently in Vanessa's hands. She made me promise to give this to you. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then her fingers moved. They curled slowly around the fabric. A tear rolled down her cheek. Lily, she whispered, barely audible. Ethan's throat tightened. Yes, baby. Lily. Keller moved, anger blooming across his face. It doesn't matter. Her memory pathways are overwritten. You can't undo this. But his voice was drowned out by the rising wail of police sirens in the distance. Theo smirked. Maybe not. But your career's over. Caleb stepped toward Keller. And your freedom. Vanessa's hand tightened around Ethan's. Her lips trembled. I'm lost, she murmured. Help me find my way back. Always, Ethan whispered. Outside, red and blue lights bathed the sidewalk in color. Inside, for the first time in years, Ethan felt something click back into place. Not memory, not certainty, but love, and it was enough to begin again. 6 months later, the house felt like a different place. Laughter floated in from the backyard, high-pitched, delighted, unmistakably Lily's. Ethan stood at the kitchen sink, watching through the window, as Vanessa knelt in the grass, helping their daughter build a lopsided sandcastle under the shade of an old oak tree. Her hair was longer now, streaked with sun, and she wore that familiar look of quiet focus that had always shown up when she was with Lily. But there was something new in her too, something tentative, like each smile was a step across a shaky bridge. The road to this moment hadn't been smooth. In the days after the rescue, Vanessa had drifted in and out of awareness. There were times when she couldn't remember her own name, when she flinched at Ethan's voice, or looked at Lily like she was a stranger. Other times, fragments returned a smell, a melody, a phrase that stirred something deep. The doctors at the Neurological Recovery Center called it cognitive reintegration. Ethan called it hope. She had told him one night, her voice barely above a whisper, there are pieces missing, holes I can't fill, but sometimes I find my way around them. He had just held her hand tighter. The trial had shocked the nation. Keller was convicted on 28 counts of medical fraud, identity theft, and unlawful experimentation. The court sentenced him to 175 years without parole. Bradley Cole received a similar fate. The media dubbed it the resurrection case. But Ethan didn't care for the headlines. What mattered was that the truth was no longer buried. Neuronova was dismantled. The New Mind Foundation's assets were frozen and funneled into a federal fund for victims and families. Caleb, moved by everything they'd uncovered, launched a nonprofit to help those who'd experienced unexplained disappearances. Theo took a consulting job with the FBI's new task force on experimental medicine abuse. And Ethan, he simply stayed home. Because for the first time in years, that word meant something again. Vanessa wasn't fully herself yet. Some memories remained locked, others fragile. But she was slowly rebuilding a sense of who she had been and who she wanted to become. One afternoon, she surprised them all by sitting down at the piano in the living room. Her fingers hovered uncertainly, then pressed the keys. The notes that followed weren't perfect, but the tune was familiar. It was the lullaby she used to hum when Lily was still in a crib. As the melody drifted through the house, Lily crawled into her lap and rested her head on Vanessa's chest. That night, as they tucked Lily into bed, Vanessa lingered longer than usual, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. I carried you here, she said softly. I used to sing to you before you were even born. Lily looked up at her wide-eyed. I remember. Ethan smiled through the lump in his throat. They didn't talk much about what had happened, not every day, but there were reminders. A new plaque on the wall. The truth always finds the light. A framed photo of the three of them in the backyard's sunlight caught in their hair. And on the shelf above the fireplace, sitting right beside a jar of lake stones they'd collected that summer, was Fred the bear that had brought Vanessa back. Every now and then, Vanessa would ask Ethan to tell her stories about their wedding, Their first apartment, the time Lily got spaghetti in her shoes. Sometimes she laughed, sometimes she cried, but she always listened. And slowly, carefully, she began to remember not just in fragments, but in feeling, in instinct, in the way she reached for Ethan's hand without thinking, or in how she spoke Lily's name, like it was music. Somewhere inside her, the woman she had been was still alive. And now, for the first time, she had the chance to meet herself again on her own terms in her own time. Together, they were learning that healing wasn't about returning to what was. It was about choosing what came next. On the anniversary of her supposed death, they returned to the lake, the same place Ethan had once stood alone, scattering ashes he now believed weren't hers. But this time, he wasn't alone. Vanessa stood beside him, wrapped in a soft sweater, her hair pulled back against the breeze. Lily held her hand tightly, a small bouquet of wildflowers clutched in the other. They didn't speak much. The silence said enough. Vanessa stepped forward and tossed the flowers into the water, watching as they floated out, carried gently by the current. I think she said quietly, part of me really did die here. The version of me that left that morning, she never made it home. Ethan slipped his hand into hers. Maybe not. But the part that matters, that part found her way back. She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. You never stopped looking. He shook his head. How could I? You're not someone you just let go of. They stood like that for a while, the three of them side by side, as the water shimmered in the late afternoon sun. No headlines, no cameras. Just a family trying to make peace with everything that had been lost and everything that had been found. In the months that followed, Vanessa's story rippled across the country. News outlets called it a miracle. Talk shows debated the ethics of identity reconstruction. Congressional hearings were held. Ethan testified 3 times. He didn't care much for the spotlight, but if telling their story helped prevent even one family from going through what they had, it was worth it. Laws were changed, protocols rewritten. Cremations could no longer proceed without dual confirmation. Experimental trials faced stricter oversight. Somewhere in Washington, people were paying attention now, but at home life was quieter. Most mornings began with Lily's laughter echoing down the hallway, the smell of coffee in the air, and Vanessa humming in the kitchen. Sometimes an old song, sometimes one she didn't even realize she knew. Some memories still hadn't returned. Others came in dreams, or when she was folding laundry and suddenly remembered how Ethan liked his socks sorted. She called it rediscovering the map. One evening, she and Ethan sat on the porch watching Lily draw chalk flowers on the sidewalk. Vanessa leaned her head on his shoulder and asked softly, do you ever think there might be more out there? You mean more like you? She nodded. People who were stolen, rewritten, buried under new names. Ethan thought about that for a long moment. I do, he said. I think there are a lot of people still waiting to be found. Vanessa turned toward him. Then maybe we help them. That fall, Caleb's nonprofit New Light launched its first national awareness campaign. Vanessa agreed to be part of it, her face appearing in interviews not as a victim, but as someone who had come back from a place no one was meant to return from. She spoke with quiet strength, always ending with the same message: love is not erased by memory, and truth doesn't stay buried forever. In their living room above the fireplace, a new photo hung on the wall. Vanessa, Ethan, and Lily in their garden arms, wrapped around each other, eyes bright with something hard-won. And beneath the photo, carved into a wooden plaque, were words Ethan had once whispered when everything still felt uncertain. The truth always finds the light. And on the quiet days when the weight of what they'd survived seemed heavier than usual, Vanessa would close her eyes, reach for Ethan's hand, and remind herself of one simple truth. She had been lost, but love had brought her home. And if this story moves something in you, if you've ever doubted your instincts, questioned what others told you was truth, or held on to hope when everyone else let go, then don't keep that feeling to yourself. Subscribe to our channel and help us share more stories that remind the world, even in the darkest places, truth and love still find a way. Thank you for watching and for believing.